I've asked hundreds of questions in my career, some tough, some emotional, some that shook people more than they expected. But nothing prepared me for the reaction I witnessed on that day. A day that began like any other interview, and turned into the moment that silenced an entire nation. My name is Ava Morgan, campus journalist, researcher, and someone who believes deeply in one simple idea. When you ask the right question, the truth has nowhere to hide. I arrived at the studio early that morning, holding a thin, ordinary-looking folder in my hands. It wasn't thick. It wasn't dramatic. It looked harmless, but inside it were contradictions, inconsistencies, and hidden truths that the world deserved to see. The man I was about to interview? A former leader. A national figure. Someone who walked into every room like he owned it. The crew prepared the lights. The camera operators whispered last-minute checks. And then he arrived, confident, smiling, waving to the small audience that had been invited. The room filled with applause, not because everyone agreed with him, but because people were curious. They wanted to see how he would answer questions no one had dared ask him before. He sat down across from me, straightened his suit jacket, and flashed a smile that said he was ready for anything. At least, that's what he believed. I placed the folder gently on the table. He noticed it immediately. His eyes shifted just for a second. A quick glance, but meaningful enough for anyone trained to observe body language. "Is that for me?" he joked with his usual charm. "Not yet," I replied. The camera's red light blinked on. We were live. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining calm eye contact, the kind that disarms even the most practiced interviewees. And then, without theatrics, without aggression, I opened the interview with a single sentence that felt simple on the surface but carried the weight of everything inside that folder. "Before we begin, how do you define honesty?" It was as if the entire room inhaled and forgot how to exhale. He blinked. Twice. His smile tightened. Not disappeared, just tightened, like a rope being pulled from both ends. He cleared his throat, perhaps expecting a different question. A softer one. A predictable one. But I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I let the silence stretch, not to intimidate him, but because silence is where truth reveals itself. Finally, he answered, honesty is telling the truth. The sentence stumbled out of him like it had tripped over its own feet. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that your full definition?" He shifted in his seat. A small movement. But for someone who had built an entire career on confidence, it was massive. And that was the moment I knew something was coming. Something he didn't expect. Something he wasn't prepared for. I gently placed my hand over the folder and tapped it once. "Because," I continued, "I want to make sure your definition matches what's inside this." The crew froze. The audience leaned forward. Even the air felt different, thicker, heavier, electric. He stared at the folder like it was a mirror reflecting a version of himself he didn't want to see. He tried laughing it off. "I hope it's good news." "It's news," I replied. "Good or bad depends on your honesty." Silence again. This wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no raised voices, no insults, no pressure. That's what made it powerful. The calmness. The simplicity. The realization that the first question, "How do you define honesty?" had already shaken him. Because a person who truly believes they are honest doesn't fear the question. A person who isn't, feels it like a blade. In that moment, I understood something. He wasn't afraid of the folder. He was afraid of whether he could protect himself from what was inside. And that fear, subtle, restrained, hidden beneath a forced smile, was the moment everything began to fall apart. Stay with me, because what happened after this question changed the entire course of the interview. And the reality is, this was the exact second his confidence cracked. The silence after my first question still lingered in the studio like a weight no one wanted to touch. His forced smile had barely recovered when I opened the folder, slowly, deliberately, the way a surgeon unveils an X-ray before telling the truth that can no longer be hidden. He watched my hands, not my face, not the cameras, not the audience, just my hands, as if the truth sat ready to strike. I pulled out the first paper, a printed transcript from one of his public speeches. I didn't say anything at first. I placed it gently in front of him, letting the bold, highlighted lines sit there between us like a challenge he already knew he wasn't prepared for. Let's begin with something simple, I said softly. He leaned forward, trying to project confidence, but his fingers were twitching. 99% of people wouldn't see it, but I did. That tiny tremor, the kind you only see when someone is trying very, very hard to appear calm. I turned to page 2. A second statement. Same topic. Same subject. But the words, completely opposite. This one, I said, tapping lightly on the page, was from June. And this one, I tapped the second page, was from August. He cleared his throat. I don't see a contradiction. Oh, you will, I replied. The audience reacted. A small stir, a quiet gasp, the beginning of a realization that something was unraveling right there in front of them. I aligned the 2 pages side by side, their highlighted portions glowing under the studio lights like warning signs. In June, I began, you said you never discussed this matter with your advisors. I paused. And in August, you said you discussed it multiple times. A muscle in his jaw tightened, hard enough to carve a shadow under the lights. Well, he said, forcing a laugh, things change. People remember things differently. I lifted my eyes, calm and steady. You don't seem unsure in either clip. Both times, you spoke with absolute certainty. The room felt smaller. Putter. Every camera leaned in, every pair of eyes locked onto him. For a brief moment, he looked like a man trying to piece together a broken timeline in his own mind. His fingers tapped the table, his breathing shallow and uneven. Look, he said, these are old quotes. You're pulling things apart. Actually, I interrupted gently, they're only 2 months apart. His voice stopped mid-sentence. That was the collision, the exact point where his defense met the truth head-on. He shifted in his chair. His leg bounced once, just once, but enough for the entire country to notice. He wasn't leaning forward confidently anymore. He was leaning back, putting distance between himself and the documents. I reached into the folder again. This time he swallowed. The next document wasn't just another quote, it was a timeline. A clear, chronological map showing what he claimed and what actually happened. His eyes widened when he saw it. Not dramatically, but with a subtle panic that only appears when someone realizes they're running out of exits. This timeline, I said, spreading the paper across the table, shows 3 dates where you insisted you were not involved. I slid another paper underneath it. And these records, I tapped them, show meetings you personally attended on those same days. He blinked. This is outrageous, he muttered. Where did you even get this? It's public record, I said. Archived footage. Official logs. Nothing confidential. Nothing hidden. Just facts. The word facts hit him harder than anything else I'd said. His mouth opened slightly, the beginning of a reply, but nothing came out. For the first time in the interview, he didn't have words. And that silence, that beautiful, undeniable silence, was louder than any confession. He rubbed his forehead, trying to gather himself. You're twisting things, Ava? No, I said quietly. I'm aligning them. And everyone in that studio, every student, every staff member, every viewer watching live, felt the shift. The power had moved. He wasn't in control anymore. The documents were. His voice, once booming and full of authority, now came out thin, fragile. Look, it's complicated. It only becomes complicated, I replied, when the truth doesn't match the story. And right then, his eyes finally met mine. Not with confidence. Not with anger. But with fear. Fear of what I would pull out next. Fear of what he had already said. Fear of the truth he could no longer control. And that was the moment the interview stopped being a conversation and became an exposure. The studio had changed. No one touched the lights, no one moved a camera, yet the entire atmosphere felt different, heavier, sharper, like the air itself understood something dangerous had been revealed. The audience leaned forward, their breaths shallow, watching a man who once commanded arenas now struggle with a simple timeline. And I could feel it, That shift that every interviewer dreams of witnessing. The moment when certainty cracks and doubt steps through the door. He was trying to regroup. His shoulders rose with every breath. His fingers rubbed the edges of the pages like he could somehow erase the contradictions printed on them. But truth doesn't smudge. And today, it wasn't going anywhere. I slid the two conflicting quotes closer toward him, almost gently. A simple question, I said, keeping my tone soft, steady. Which version do you want the American people to believe today? His reaction came in micro-expressions, signs most viewers wouldn't consciously notice but would feel. The tightening around the eyes. The subtle downward pull of his mouth. The way he avoided the center camera. He looked like a man trying to scan an entire universe of excuses but finding only locked doors. I think people know what I mean, he muttered at last. That, I replied, is not an answer. A murmur rippled through the audience, a quiet acknowledgement that the power dynamic had fully shifted. This was no longer his stage. It was a truth room now. And the truth wasn't standing beside him. He tried again. You're dragging up old statements, Ava. Everyone evolves. Everyone clarifies. Context matters. I nodded. Absolutely. So let's talk about clarity. I reached into the folder again, and this time, I watched fear flicker across his face before he could hide it. It was quick, a second maybe less, but it was real. I pulled out two more documents, both neatly printed. One was his public declaration from last year. The other was his sworn testimony from this year. I placed them side by side like twin mirrors reflecting two different men. In this statement, I began, tapping the left page, you said you had no knowledge of the situation. I tapped the page on the right. And in this one, you describe your involvement in specific detail. His breathing changed, deeper, faster, the first sign of rising panic. That's taken out of context, he protested, voice cracking in the middle. Then give us the context, I said. There it was, the moment he realized he was cornered. Not by me. Not by the cameras. But by his own words. He opened his mouth, searching for a sentence he could stand on, but every phrase in his mind must have collapsed before reaching his tongue. His eyes darted downward to avoid the printed lines, then upward as if the ceiling might whisper a lifeline. But the ceiling stayed silent. Ava, he said quietly, pleading now instead of defending, this is complicated. I leaned in slightly, voice still calm. Truth is never complicated. Only lies are. Something inside him flinched, a slight recoil as if the words had physical weight. The room fell completely still. Even the humming of the lights felt muted. He shifted again, a nervous glance toward the exit. A look that said he was thinking about fleeing, already imagining the escape route. But we weren't done yet. I placed one final document on the table, sliding it toward him with both hands so no one could pretend it was accidental or rushed. It was a chart, clean, undeniable, connecting his statements, his dates, his public claims, and the factual records all together in a single, devastating image. When he saw it, he didn't speak. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe for a moment. Instead, his eyes widened, the kind of widening that happens when the last piece of a lie falls out of place. That's not fair, he whispered. It's not about fairness, I replied. It's about accuracy. He exhaled sharply. A long, broken breath. The kind of breath someone takes when they realize they're standing in their own shadow, and the shadow is bigger than they expected. Students in the audience exchanged glances. Some whispered questions. Others just stared, stunned, watching the slow, painful unraveling of a man who had never before been cornered by facts. Doubt wasn't just in the room now. It was sitting beside him. It was touching his shoulder. It was whispering into every camera watching around the country. And he knew it. This wasn't the end of the interview. But it was the beginning of the end. Because once doubt becomes the moment it wrapped its hands around him and squeezed. The studio was no longer just a stage. It had transformed into a pressure chamber. Every light seemed brighter. Every camera seemed closer. Every silence seemed louder. And he felt all of it. He shifted again, tugging at his suit jacket like it suddenly didn't fit. Sweat gathered subtly at the edge of his hairline, Not enough for panic, but enough for the audience to sense something was unraveling. I kept my composure, my voice level. I have learned in journalism. You don't need to raise your voice to break someone. You just need to hold your ground while they lose theirs. So I placed the timeline chart directly in front of him, rotating it so he couldn't avoid reading it. Let's walk through this together, I said softly. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. I already told you. You haven't told me anything, I replied. You've only reacted. A punch delivered without volume. His eyes flashed, a mixture of anger and fear, the expression of a man who felt exposed in a way he'd never experienced. Look, you're trying to trap me, he snapped. I'm showing you your own words, I said. If that feels like a trap, maybe the issue isn't the questions. A wave of gasps rolled through the audience. The sound seemed to pierce him. His next attempt at composure came out jagged. This interview is becoming hostile. I leaned back in my chair, calm and collected. No hostility here. Just facts. Would you like to address them now? He hesitated, a long, painful pause that lasted far longer than he intended. A pause long enough for the entire country to feel the truth in the air. He wasn't searching for an answer. He was searching for an escape. He rubbed his forehead, his fingers pressing deeply into his skin as if he could push the stress out through force. These dates are misleading, he murmured, voice cracking on the last word. I tapped the chart once. A slow, deliberate tap that echoed in the microphone. They were taken from your official calendar, I said. Your signature. Your office. Your team. His breath hitched. The cameras zoomed in, catching every tremor, every flicker of panic. You're twisting things, he insisted, voice rising now, the first clear sign of emotional collapse. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply asked, then explain the difference. And that sentence, that small, simple sentence, struck him harder than anything that had come before. Because explanations require truth. And truth was the one thing he no longer controlled. His frustration turned into something more raw. Fear disguised as anger. You know what, Ava? This is ridiculous. You're trying to make me look dishonest. I smiled slightly. I'm not making you look anything. I'm showing what you said. What you did. You're responsible for how it looks. The audience fell silent again, stunned by the precision of the moment. That's when it happened. The moment the breakdown wasn't subtle anymore. His hands shook. His breathing grew shallow. His eyes darted everywhere except the chart. The man who walked in composed and confident was now unraveling in real time, in front of millions. I gently opened another document. He flinched. Ava, stop, he pleaded, voice no longer steady. You don't want me to stop, I said softly. You want to explain. So go ahead. Explain why your public statements contradict every piece of evidence here. He stared at me. Not like an interviewer, not like an opponent, but like someone who just realized he was losing control of the story, something he believed he owned. His voice trembled as he tried to speak. This interview is going off the rails. No, I replied. It's finally back on track. The audience erupted, not in cheers, but in murmurs of disbelief. They were witnessing something historic, the moment a public figure stopped sounding powerful and started sounding scared. He slammed his palm lightly on the table. I've had enough of this. The truth doesn't care what you've had enough of, I said coldly. That was it. The breaking point. His face flushed. His composure shattered. He looked around like a man drowning in a room with no water, desperate, breathless, lost. This was no longer an interview. This was collapse. Slow, painful, undeniable collapse. And the most powerful part? I hadn't raised my voice once. The room had reached a boiling point, even though the temperature hadn't changed. What had changed was him. The man who once carried himself like a fortress now sat like a structure on the edge of collapse. Every breath he took sounded like an argument with himself. Every blink looked like a retreat. And the audience knew it. Everyone in that studio, from the students sitting in the back row to the technicians behind the cameras, could feel the tension tightening like a rope around his confidence. He wasn't just rattled anymore. He was unraveling. His hands trembled as he snatched the chart off the table, scanning it as if a hidden escape might be printed in the margins. But the paper held only one truth. He had contradicted himself. Repeatedly. Unmistakably. Publicly. He slammed the paper back down. The sound echoed through the studio like a warning shot. "I'm done with this," he snapped. "This whole thing is a setup." I clasped my hands calmly, leaning forward just slightly. "A setup? Your documents. Your dates. Your words. How is that a setup?" His lips tightened. He avoided my eyes. And then, for the first time in the interview, he whispered something, not to me, not to the audience, but to himself. "This is getting out of control." I heard it. The microphones picked it up. Everyone heard it. He wasn't talking about the interview. He was talking about himself. I sat up straight. "And what exactly is out of control? The facts? Or your reactions to them?" His head snapped up, rage flickering behind his eyes. "You're twisting everything." "How?" I asked softly. That one word, how, was the final blow. It demanded clarity he didn't have. It demanded honesty he couldn't give. And it demanded composure he had already lost. He tore off his microphone pack, the wire yanking free with a sharp rip. The audience gasped. Studio staff froze. Camera operators looked at each other, unsure whether to follow his movement or stay steady. "Ava, this is over," he barked, voice cracking under the weight of his fear. "No," I corrected gently, "it's ending. There's a difference. Endings reveal character." He pointed a shaky finger at me. You're trying to embarrass me." I tilted my head. "The truth is embarrassing only to those who fear it." His chest rose sharply. A man hit with a blow he didn't see coming. He stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched backward, scraping the studio floor. The sound was ugly. Desperate. Every camera turned toward him like a spotlight catching a fleeing suspect. He adjusted his jacket, the motion frantic. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked." "You were only asked to clarify your own statements," I said quietly. "And you couldn't." His eyes went wide, a mix of humiliation, anger, and panic. It was the look of a man who realized he had handed the country a moment. And lost control of it. He took one step back from the table. Then another. His breathing now loud enough for the microphones to catch. People in the audience shifted nervously. Some bit their lips. Some whispered, "He's leaving." Others just stared, shocked that a man who once led millions was now being undone by a folder on a table. "Cut the cameras," he shouted. They didn't. They couldn't. This was live. He stormed toward the exit, but even in his anger, he didn't walk in a straight line. His steps were uneven, his motions heavy, as if the weight of every contradiction pulled at his ankles. Just as he reached the door, I spoke. "So, measured. Final. Walking away won't change the truth." He froze. Only for half a second, but it was enough. Enough for the audience to gasp. Enough for the cameras to zoom in. Enough for the entire nation to realize. He wasn't walking out because he was strong. He was walking out because he had nothing left to say. Without turning back, he yanked the door open. A burst of bright hallway lights spilled into the studio. Slam. The door closed behind him with a force that felt like the punctuation mark on his downfall. Silence. Pure, heavy, unforgettable silence. The kind that becomes history. I folded my hands, letting the room settle, letting the nation breathe again. "He left the room," I said calmly, "but the questions remain." The cameras slowly turned back to me. The audience stared, stunned. And somewhere in the hallway, he was gasping for air. A man who had lost the one thing he had always relied on. Control. The door had barely slammed shut before the shockwave hit the studio. For several seconds, no one moved. Not the cameras, not the audience, not the crew. It was as if every person in that room needed just one breath, one moment, to understand the magnitude of what had happened. A former national leader had just walked out of an interview. Not under attack. Not because of unfairness. But because he could not answer his own truth. And the world saw it live. The stillness inside the studio cracked when the audience began whispering, scattered fragments of disbelief. Did he just leave? He really walked out? This is going viral. They were right, because outside the walls of that studio, something even bigger was happening. The internet erupts within seconds. The live stream was still rolling, broadcasting every moment without interruption. And the walkout, that explosive, unforgettable walkout, became a storm the second it hit the digital universe. On social media, timelines didn't just update, they detonated. Clips of the walkout spread like wildfire. Screenshots, zoomed in slow-motion footage of him tearing off the microphone. Angles from every camera. Replays looping without mercy. Within minutes. Hashtag he walked out. Hashtag Ava Morgan interview. Hashtag truth room. Hashtag where are you going? All shot to the top of trending across the country. And the reactions? They came in waves. Some were brutal. He folded like a cheap chair. If you can't face questions, you can't lead. Imagine running a country when you can't handle Ava Morgan. Some were emotional. This is the first time someone held him accountable. Some were defensive. He was treated unfairly. She cornered him. And then there were the students, my campus, the people who watched me grow as a journalist. Campus reactions, a different battlefield. At the university courtyard, dozens of students watching on giant screens erupted as the walkout happened. Videos showed hands on heads, jaws dropped, friends spinning around to confirm what they'd just seen. Later, as I walked past the journalism building, I overheard conversations. She didn't raise her voice once, that's the crazy part. That walkout said more than any answer could. She exposed an entire persona with a folder. The campus, usually buzzing with light-hearted chatter, had turned into a hive of analysis. Professors paused classes just to discuss the walkout. Political science groups formed circles debating whether it was fear, guilt, ego, or a mix of all three. And in those conversations, one thing was clear. People weren't debating the documents anymore. They were debating his character. News outlets respond, analyst frenzy. By midday, major networks were in full breakdown mode. The walkout replayed on every screen with banners like, "Leader walks out of interview. Unprecedented interview exit. Morgan versus the former leader, what happened?" Expert panels assembled instantly. Body language analysts slowed the footage to half speed, pointing out every flinch, every twitch, every look toward the exit. Communication experts dissected my questions. She stayed calm. He escalated. That's why he lost ground. Psychologists analyzed the meltdown. This wasn't anger. This was fear. Political strategists panicked live on air. This walkout will follow him forever. And while everyone debated his collapse, no one seemed to question the documents. No one attacked the evidence. No one tried to argue the timeline. Because the truth wasn't the part people wanted to escape. The walkout was. Behind the scenes, the door that wouldn't close quietly. Back in the studio, the energy felt surreal. Crew members whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." Camera operators stared at monitors replaying the moment. Some staff were stunned silent, others looked almost shaken. But the most unexpected reaction? Sympathy. Not for him. For the country. Because if a leader cannot face a folder, how could he ever face a crisis? My reflection, the weight of what just happened. I sat alone for a moment, the empty chair across from me still warm from where he had sat minutes before. That empty chair, abandoned, powerless, exposed, had become the symbol of everything. A chair that once represented authority now represented avoidance. And as the crew prepared to end the broadcast, one thought echoed in my mind. He didn't walk out because of me. He walked out because of the truth. And the truth doesn't chase. It waits. Right where he left it. History is rarely shaped by long speeches. It's rarely defined by the loudest voices or the biggest promises. More often, history turns on moments, small, fragile moments, when character is revealed, not declared. And on that day, the moment that changed everything, was not a statement he made, not an argument he won, not a speech he delivered. It was an empty chair. That chair, still slightly turned from where he shoved it back, sat under the studio lights long after he left. Silent. Still. Accusing. People always imagine legacy as something you build. Something you carve into the world through power, influence, and decisions. But the truth is simpler. Sometimes your legacy is built by the moment you choose to run. While analysts debated the walkout and the country spiraled into discussion, that chair remained exactly where he abandoned it. And every time I looked at it, I saw something deeper. I saw a man trying to escape himself. The public reaction. A nation decides his story. Across the country, the debate wasn't polite. It wasn't measured. It wasn't soft. This moment struck a nerve, the kind people can't ignore no matter how hard they try. People argued in living rooms, classrooms, coffee shops, office lounges. Some said, he was cornered. Others said, he cornered himself. In the cafe near our campus, I overheard a student say, leaders don't walk out. Leaders step up. Another replied, if a folder scares him, what else will? Every generation claims it wants honesty, transparency, accountability. But this time, they weren't asking for it. They were demanding it. Online polls exploded. Was the walkout justified? Millions voted. Millions debated. Millions watched the clip again and again, dissecting every second. The walkout became more than a moment. It became a mirror. A reflection of what people feared and what people expected. And the reflection wasn't flattering. The man he was versus the man the world saw. Before the interview, he was still seen, by supporters and critics alike, as strong, confident, calculated, someone who could command a room with a single gesture. But after the interview, people didn't see strength. They saw avoidance. They saw fragmentation. They saw a man who walked into a truth room and couldn't walk out with the truth. An empty chair says more than 1,000 speeches. My reflection, the responsibility we all share. When the studio emptied and the lights dimmed, I sat alone for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the magnitude settle into my bones. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something heavier, the weight of what truth demands. Being a journalist is not about defeating someone. It's about revealing what lies beneath their words. And that day, what was revealed wasn't complicated. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't political. It was human. A human being who chose exit over explanation. Flight over honesty. Emotion over reason. And the world saw it. The next day, the walkout becomes history. Morning headlines were merciless. The interview he couldn't finish. Leader walks out, facts remain. A chair speaks louder than he did. Editorials poured in. Podcasts broke down the psychology. Late-night hosts replayed the clip with stunned amazement. Students wrote reaction essays for class. Political strategists scrambled to rebuild narratives that had cracked beyond repair. But no one could change what the world witnessed. Because the world didn't see a policy failure. Or a political misstep. Or a communication error. The world saw a character collapse. My final words to the viewers, the choice is yours. I looked directly into the camera, speaking not as a journalist now, but as a witness to a defining moment. A leader's strength, I said, is not tested when the room cheers for him. It's tested when the room questions him. I paused, letting every viewer, every household, every living room breathe in the truth. And yesterday, when the moment demanded honesty, he chose the door. The chair behind me remained empty. History had already chosen its metaphor. So now, I continued, the question isn't about him anymore. It's about us. What do we expect from those who ask for our trust? What do we demand from those who claim authority? Did he walk out of the interview, or did he walk out on accountability? I leaned forward slightly. Tell me, I concluded, in your eyes, was that walkout courage, or was it fear? If this moment opened your eyes, hit like. If you believe truth should never be avoided, hit subscribe. And comment below. Walkout equals courage or cowardice? Let your voice decide the legacy he left behind.